The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence like a blade through silk. Ghost 7, this is Overwatch. We have a problem. The voice belonged to command, but there was something different about it, a tremor that made seasoned operators pause mid-breath. In the communications bunker 30 feet below the desert floor, Captain Zara Reaper Volkov set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. The ceramic made no sound against the metal desk. She'd been expecting this call for 3 days. Ever since the intelligence reports started filtering in about a high-value target moving through the Kandahar province, protected by terrain that made conventional strikes impossible. The target had a name that made generals lose sleep. Khalil, the Ghost, Nazari, architect of 17 embassy bombings, orchestrator of the Mumbai train incident, and the man who'd personally executed 43 humanitarian workers across 3 continents. He moved like smoke through mountains that had swallowed entire armies. Copy, Overwatch. What's the nature of the problem? Reaper's voice carried the kind of calm that only came from 5 combat deployments and a confirmed kill count that made her squadron uncomfortable at dinner tables. But they didn't know about the nightmares, or how she still woke up reaching for weapons that weren't there. The static cleared and Command's voice returned, sharper now. Nazari's moving through the Hindu Kush in 6 hours. Weather window is closing fast, storms moving in from the northwest. Our best sniper team is in position at Echo Ridge, but the pause stretched like a held breath. Martinez took a shot at 1,847 meters. Clean miss. Targets now aware, relocating with increased security. We've got one window left before he disappears into those caves for another 6 months. Reaper stood, her movements economical, practiced. Around the bunker, other operators had gone quiet, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure that preceded impossible missions. She walked to the tactical display, studying the topographical nightmare of peaks and valleys that made Afghanistan the graveyard of empires. Her finger traced a route across the screen, calculating wind drift, bullet drop, and the dozen variables that separated precision from prayer. "What's the range to target from Echo Ridge now?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would change everything. 2 miles, 400 yards, maybe more with the new position. The bunker fell silent except for the hum of electronics and the distant rumble of generators. 2 miles, 400 yards. In sniper terms, that wasn't just difficult, it was legendary. The kind of shot that existed in whispered stories and classified after-action reports. The kind of shot that haunted the dreams of marksmen who'd spent decades perfecting their craft. Major Brooks stepped forward from the shadows, his weathered face creased with concern. "Reaper, I know what you're thinking, but that distance." He shook his head slowly. "Even you can't." "Sir," she interrupted quietly, "with respect, how many 2-mile shots have you personally witnessed?" Her gray eyes held his gaze without flinching. "Because I've made 3. The silence that followed was different now. It carried weight, history, and the unspoken acknowledgement that some operators existed in a realm beyond normal human capability. Reaper had earned her call sign not through bravado or luck, but through a combination of natural talent, obsessive training, and something indefinable that separated the exceptional from the impossible. She'd grown up in the forests of northern Minnesota, where her grandfather, a veteran of 3 wars, had taught her that shooting wasn't about pulling triggers. It was about becoming one with physics itself. "The Barrett's already prepped," she said simply, referring to the .50 caliber rifle that had become an extension of her soul over the past 8 years. "I just need a bird and 30 minutes to get into position." Command's voice crackled back through the radio. "Reaper, confirm you're volunteering for a shot at 2.4 miles in deteriorating weather conditions with a fleeing high-value target." She was already reaching for her gear. "Affirmative. Ghost 7 is moving to intercept." What none of them knew, what the files and commendations couldn't capture, was that Zara Volkov had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Not this specific shot, but this convergence of impossible circumstances and absolute necessity. She'd been the girl who'd outshot men twice her age at 14, the teenager who'd earned a full scholarship to West Point based purely on marksmanship scores that shouldn't have been humanly possible, and the young lieutenant who'd requested combat deployments when her peers were choosing desk jobs. But more than that, she'd been shaped by loss in ways that made her understand the true weight of a single bullet. Her older brother Michael had died in Fallujah, killed by a sniper who'd escaped into the urban maze before coalition forces could respond. The man had never been caught, never been held accountable. That failure had burned itself into Zara's DNA, transforming her from a talented shooter into something approaching a force of nature. The helicopter rotors were already spinning up outside, their rhythmic thunder vibrating through the bunker's reinforced walls. As Reaper gathered her equipment, Barrett M82A1, Leupold Mark IV scope, custom hand-loaded rounds that she'd personally tested to subsonic perfection, she felt the familiar calm settling over her mind. This was the space where doubt died and physics became poetry. Major Brooks appeared beside her, his expression mixing concern with grudging admiration. "Zara," he said quietly, using her actual name for the first time in months, "you know this is impossible." She looked up at him while securing the Barrett in its case. "Sir, with all due respect, I've been making impossible shots since I was 12 years old. My grandfather used to say that the rifle doesn't care about your fears, it only responds to your certainty." She paused, her hands stilling on the weapon case. Nazari killed 43 people who were trying to help children get clean water and medical care. If I don't take this shot, he disappears for 6 months, maybe forever. How many more will die while we're waiting for a more convenient opportunity? The question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged round. Everyone in the bunker understood the mathematics of counterterrorism. Sometimes the window between action and regret was measured in heartbeats. Sometimes the difference between justice and tragedy came down to one person's willingness to attempt the impossible. Command's voice cut through the moment. "Ghost 7, birds ready for immediate departure, weather window closing in 47 minutes." Reaper shouldered her gear and moved toward the exit. As she reached the door, she turned back to face the assembled operators, men and women who'd seen combat in a dozen countries, who'd performed miracles under fire, who'd never once questioned her competence but who couldn't quite hide their skepticism about what she was attempting. 2 miles, 400 yards, she said quietly. Today we find out what impossible really means. The heavy door sealed behind her with a sound like a coffin closing. In the bunker, the radio crackled with updates from the field. Target movement, weather deterioration, window of opportunity shrinking by the minute. But all of that was background noise now. The shot had already begun in Reaper's mind, where wind speed and bullet trajectory were dancing their eternal mathematics, where success and failure balanced on the edge of a single exhale. Above ground, the Black Hawk's rotors carved through the pre-dawn darkness, carrying her toward a rendezvous with physics that would either make history or become another classified failure buried in Pentagon files. The mountains ahead looked like sleeping giants, their peaks lost in clouds that were growing thicker by the minute. As the helicopter lifted off, Reaper closed her eyes and began the mental ritual that had preceded every significant shot of her career. She visualized the bullet's path through thin mountain air, saw it fighting gravity and wind resistance across a distance that most snipers would never attempt even in perfect conditions. She felt the Barrett's familiar weight, remembered the exact amount of pressure required to break the trigger without disturbing her sight picture. But mostly, she thought about 43 humanitarian workers who died believing they were making the world safer for children. The radio in her headset crackled with updates from Echo Ridge. "Ghost 7, this is Martinez. Target is moving northeast through the valley. I've got eyes on, but the distance is increasing. Winds picking up, gusting to 15 knots from the northwest." Martinez was one of the best snipers in the Army, a man whose precision had ended careers and saved convoys. If he said the shot was getting harder, it was getting harder. But Reaper had stopped thinking in terms of hard and easy years ago. There were only shots that mattered and shots that didn't. This one mattered more than most. Copy, Martinez. I'll be in position in 12 minutes. Keep eyes on target and relay any movement changes. The helicopter banked hard left, following a valley that wound through the mountains like a river carved in stone. Through the window, Reaper could see the terrain that had challenged armies for millennia, jagged peaks that seemed to scrape the belly of the sky, valleys so deep they held their own weather systems, ridgelines that offered concealment to anyone smart enough to use them properly. It was beautiful and terrible and absolutely unforgiving. Her radio crackled again. Ghost 7, this is Overwatch. Latest intel suggests target has increased security posture. Estimate 12 to 15 hostiles in close protection formation. More variables, more complications, but also more confirmation that Nazari knew he was being hunted, which meant this truly was the last opportunity before he vanished into the cave systems that honeycombed these mountains. The urgency crystallized in Reaper's chest like ice forming on still water. The Black Hawk began its approach to the landing zone, a patch of relatively flat ground about 800 meters from Echo Ridge. As they descended, Reaper could see Martinez's position, a carefully camouflaged hide site that offered commanding views of the valley below. It was textbook sniper positioning, except for the small detail that the target was now more than 2 miles away and moving through terrain that created microweather systems. 30 seconds to LZ, the pilot announced through the intercom. Weather's deteriorating faster than forecast. You've got maybe 20 minutes before visibility drops to 0. Reaper nodded, her mind already transitioning from helicopter passenger to apex predator. The moment her boots touched the ground, she would become something different, a fusion of human intuition and mechanical precision that existed solely to deliver 49 grams of copper and lead across an impossible distance. The helicopter touched down with barely a bump, rotors still spinning as Reaper stepped onto the rocky ground. The air was thinner here, sharp with altitude and the approaching storm. She could smell snow in the wind, see the first wisps of clouds beginning to obscure the higher peaks. Time was becoming the enemy. She moved with practiced efficiency toward Martinez's position, the Barrett case slung across her back, additional equipment distributed across her load-bearing vest. Every step was calculated to minimize disturbance, every movement designed to blend with the natural contours of the landscape. This was the approach phase, where preparation met opportunity and miracles were born or stillborn. Martinez spotted her first, his ghillie suit so perfectly adapted to the local terrain that he seemed more geological formation than human being. He raised 2 fingers, target still visible, then pointed northwest toward a valley that disappeared into the growing cloud cover. "Talk to me," Reaper said as she settled beside him, already unpacking the Barrett with movements that looked like a religious ritual. "Target convoy stopped about 3 minutes ago," Martinez whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Looks like they're checking their route, maybe switching vehicles. Distance is holding at approximately 2,400 meters, but that could change fast." Reaper nodded, assembling the Barrett with the kind of muscle memory that came from 10,000 repetitions. Each component clicked into place with mechanical certainty: barrel, stock, scope, bipod. The rifle was more than a weapon. It was a precision instrument capable of delivering death across distances that challenged the curvature of the earth itself. She settled into the prone position, Barrett aligned with the target area, and began the process that would either make her a legend or confirm the limitations of human capability. Through the looped scope, the distant valley materialized in sharp detail. She could see vehicles, movement, the tiny figures of men who thought they were safe behind 2 miles of empty air. "Wind?" she asked Martinez. "Variable, averaging 12 knots northwest, gusting to 16. Pressures dropping, storms definitely coming. Reaper made microscopic adjustments to the scope, compensating for distance, elevation, atmospheric pressure, and the dozen other variables that affected bullet trajectory over such extreme ranges. This wasn't just shooting, it was applied physics at the edge of possibility. Her radio crackled. Ghost 7, this is Overwatch. Target is moving again, heading northeast toward the cave systems. You've got maybe 8 minutes before they're beyond effective range. 8 minutes. In sniper terms, that was both an eternity and an instant. Time enough for careful preparation, but barely enough for the kind of precision this shot demanded. Reaper settled deeper into her position, feeling the Barrett become an extension of her nervous system. Through the scope, she could see the convoy moving along what looked like an ancient trade route carved into the mountainside. The lead vehicle contained her target. She was certain of that. Intelligence had confirmed Nazari's preference for personal security, his habit of riding in the front car where he could control the situation. The mathematics of the shot began crystallizing in her mind. Muzzle velocity of 2,799 feet per second, bullet drop of approximately 37.1 mph at this range, wind drift calculations that changed with each gust. But beneath the numbers was something more intuitive, a sense of harmony between shooter, rifle, and target that couldn't be quantified or taught. She took a breath, held it, and began the final sequence that would either validate years of training or demonstrate the absolute limits of human precision. The crosshairs settled on the lead vehicle, and for just a moment everything else disappeared. The wind, the approaching storm, the weight of 43 lives demanding justice. In that moment of perfect stillness, Reaper became exactly what her call sign implied. An agent of inevitable consequence, death arriving on wings of copper and physics across a distance that shouldn't have been possible for any human being to bridge. The trigger began its rearward journey under the precise pressure of her index finger, and history held its breath. Martinez watched through his own scope as Reaper entered what snipers called the zone, that space between heartbeats where perfect shots were born. He'd seen dozens of marksmen attempt difficult shots over the years, but there was something different about watching Reaper work. She didn't just aim at targets. She seemed to commune with them across impossible distances. "Target vehicle has stopped again," he whispered into his radio. "Looks like they're examining something on the ground. This might be your best opportunity." Through her scope, Reaper could see figures moving around the lead vehicle. One man stood apart from the others, taller, wearing the kind of tactical vest that suggested leadership. Intelligence photos had burned Khalil Nazari's profile into her memory. The distinctive beard, the way he held his left shoulder slightly higher than his right, legacy of shrapnel from a drone strike 3 years earlier. The habit of scanning his surroundings with the paranoid intensity of someone who'd survived by never feeling safe. This was him, she was certain. The wind gusted harder, and she could feel the Barrett responding to the atmospheric pressure changes. At this distance, even small environmental shifts could push a bullet several feet off target. She made minute adjustments to her point of aim, calculating the bullet's parabolic arc across more than 2 miles of thin mountain air. Her breathing settled into the rhythm that preceded every significant shot of her career. Deep inhale, partial exhale, hold. In that space between breaths, her heart rate dropped, her vision clarified, and the universe narrowed to the width of crosshairs and the mathematics of trajectory. "Wind shifting," Martinez reported quietly. "Coming more from the west now, maybe 14 knots. Reaper adjusted again, her modifications so subtle they were almost imperceptible. This was the art that elevated exceptional marksmen into something approaching the mythical. The ability to read wind patterns across vast distances, to sense atmospheric changes before instruments detected them, to become one with physics itself. Through the scope, she watched Nazari point toward the north, probably discussing route options with his security team. He was exposed, standing in the open, unaware that death was calculating its approach across an impossible distance. This was the moment. This was why she'd spent 15 years perfecting skills that most people couldn't comprehend. The trigger reached its breaking point, and the Barrett erupted with thunder that echoed off the surrounding peaks. The recoil drove against Reaper's shoulder with familiar violence, but she rode it smoothly, maintaining her sight picture to observe the bullet's impact. In the microsecond after firing, she was already calculating corrections for a follow-up shot, though at this distance, there wouldn't be time for a second attempt. The bullet's flight time across 2,400 meters was approximately 3.2 seconds, an eternity in combat, a heartbeat in human terms. During those seconds, 49 grams of copper and lead traveled through changing atmospheric conditions, fought gravity and wind resistance, and carried with it the hopes of everyone who died at Nazari's hands. Martinez kept his scope trained on the target area, ready to call the shot. Through his magnified vision, he could see the convoy members still moving around their vehicles, unaware that death was approaching at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. Then the bullet arrived. The impact was visible even at extreme distance, a sudden eruption of dust and movement around the lead vehicle. Martinez saw figures dropping to the ground, seeking cover, but one figure remained motionless in the dirt beside the car. "Hit," he said quietly into his radio, the single word carrying more weight than a full after-action report. But Reaper was already watching through her own scope, confirming what her instincts had told her the moment she'd pulled the trigger. The shot had been perfect, not just accurate, but absolutely precise. Nazari lay motionless in the Afghan dust, his reign of terror ended by a bullet that had traveled further than most people could see clearly. Command's voice crackled through their radios. "Ghost 7, confirm target status." Martinez continued observing through his scope. The convoy security team was in chaos, some seeking cover behind vehicles, others checking on their fallen leader. But there was no urgency in their movements around Nazari, no attempts at medical aid, no frantic radio calls for evacuation. They were securing a body, not saving a life. "Confirmed KIA," Martinez reported. "Target is down and non-responsive. Convoy security is in damage control mode." The radio went quiet for several seconds, then Command's voice returned with barely contained amazement. "Copy that, Ghost 7. Confirm shot distance at 2,400 meters. "Affirmative," Reaper replied, already beginning to break down the Barrett. 2 miles, 400 yards. 1 shot, 1 kill." But even as she spoke the words, Reaper felt no triumph, no sense of personal victory. She'd eliminated a man who'd orchestrated the deaths of dozens of innocent people, but the mathematics of justice were never that simple. Nazari's death wouldn't bring back the humanitarian workers, wouldn't undo the embassy bombings, wouldn't heal the families who'd lost everything to his particular brand of extremism. What it would do was prevent future atrocities, close a chapter in the ongoing war against terrorism, and demonstrate to others like Nazari that distance and terrain weren't always enough protection from consequence. Sometimes justice traveled at 2,800 feet per second and arrived with absolute finality. Martinez helped her pack the remaining equipment, both of them working with the efficient silence of professionals who understood that exceptional shots were just another day's work, regardless of their historical significance. The approaching storm was beginning to affect visibility, and they needed to reach the extraction point before weather made helicopter operations impossible. As they moved away from the shooting position, Reaper allowed herself one glance back at the distant valley, where Khalil Nazari's body lay in the Afghan dust. Somewhere in that direction, 43 humanitarian workers could finally rest in peace, knowing their deaths hadn't gone unanswered. The radio crackled with activity as word of the successful shot spread through the command structure. They were already calling it impossible, legendary, the kind of marksmanship that would be studied in sniper schools for decades. But for Reaper, it was simply the convergence of preparation, opportunity, and absolute necessity. She'd made the shot not because it was impossible, but because someone had to. The helicopter extraction went smoothly despite deteriorating weather conditions. As the Black Hawk lifted off from the mountain landing zone, Reaper settled back against the troop seat and closed her eyes. The Barrett was secured beside her, still warm from firing, its purpose fulfilled in the most absolute terms possible. Through her headset, she could hear radio chatter from various command levels as news of Nazari's death rippled through the intelligence community. The excitement in their voices was palpable. This was the kind of operational success that justified years of patient surveillance, intelligence gathering, and strategic positioning. But Reaper was already transitioning mentally from the shot to its aftermath. In her experience, the most dangerous moments often came after successful operations, when adrenaline faded and the full implications of what had happened began to crystallize. She just eliminated one of the world's most wanted terrorists with a single bullet fired across a distance that challenged human capability. The attention that would generate was something she'd have to navigate carefully. Her radio crackled with a priority message from command. Ghost 7, this is General Morrison. Outstanding work today. I want a full debrief as soon as you're back at base. General Morrison didn't communicate directly with field operators unless something was historically significant. His personal involvement confirmed what Reaper had suspected. The shot would have consequences far beyond Nazari's death. It would become part of military legend, studied and analyzed and probably exaggerated with each retelling. Martinez leaned over from his seat across the helicopter's cargo bay. "Hell of a shot," he said simply. "I've been doing this for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like it." Reaper nodded acknowledgement but didn't respond. Martinez was a professional, someone who understood that exceptional marksmanship was built on thousands of ordinary shots performed under gradually increasing difficulty. The 2,400-meter kill wasn't magic. It was the inevitable result of 15 years spent pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Through the helicopter's window, she could see the Afghan landscape rolling past below. Ancient valleys carved by geological time, peaks that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, terrain that had humbled Alexander the Great and broken the Soviet Union. Somewhere in those mountains, other terrorists were planning other atrocities. Nazari's death would disrupt their networks but wouldn't eliminate the underlying ideology that created men like him. The war would continue. There would be other missions, other impossible shots, other opportunities to prove that distance and terrain weren't absolute protection from accountability. But today had been different. Today, physics and justice had aligned across more than 2 miles of thin mountain air. As the Black Hawk approached their forward operating base, Reaper began mentally preparing for the debrief that would follow. She'd need to reconstruct every aspect of the shot: environmental conditions, equipment specifications, ballistic calculations, target identification procedures. The military would want to understand exactly how she'd achieved what their computers said was beyond human capability. What they wouldn't understand, what she couldn't explain in any debrief, was the intuitive element that separated exceptional marksmen from mechanical precision. The ability to sense wind patterns, to feel atmospheric pressure changes, to become one with the rifle and the target and the mathematics of trajectory. That was something that couldn't be taught or quantified or replicated through technology. It was something that had to be lived, shot by shot, across years of gradual evolution from good to excellent to impossible. The helicopter touched down with practiced smoothness, rotors still spinning as ground crews moved to secure the aircraft. Reaper gathered her equipment and stepped onto the tarmac, feeling the familiar transition from operational mode to administrative reality. The next few hours would be filled with debriefs, reports, and analysis as the military tried to understand exactly what had happened in the mountains. But before any of that, she needed to complete one final ritual. Walking to the armory, she carefully cleaned and secured the Barrett M82A1, checking each component with the kind of attention that a concert pianist might give to a Stradivarius. The rifle had performed flawlessly under impossible conditions. It deserved care proportional to its service. As she worked, other operators began filtering into the armory. Word of the shot was already spreading through informal channels. They maintained respectful distance, understanding that exceptional performances required space for proper decompression. But their presence was acknowledgement of what had happened, recognition that they'd witnessed something that would be discussed in sniper communities for decades. Master Sergeant Williams approached as she was completing the rifle maintenance. Williams was old-school Army, a man who'd served in every major conflict since Panama and who'd forgotten more about marksmanship than most people ever learned. His opinion carried weight throughout Special Operations community. "Heard you made quite a shot today," he said quietly. Reaper looked up from the Barrett. "Just did what needed doing, Sergeant." Williams nodded slowly. 2 miles, 400 yards, in deteriorating weather, against a moving target. He paused, studying her with the kind of assessment that came from 30 years of evaluating soldiers. "You know this changes things, right? Shot like that doesn't stay classified forever." She understood what he meant. Exceptional military performances had a way of transcending operational security, becoming part of military culture regardless of official classification levels. The shot would be studied, analyzed, discussed, and eventually mythologized until the reality became secondary to the legend. "I'm not looking for fame, Sergeant." "Fame's not looking for you either," Williams replied. "But respect is, and responsibility. People are going to expect things from you now that they don't expect from other operators." It was an accurate assessment. Success at extreme levels created expectations that were difficult to manage and impossible to ignore. She'd just proven that certain theoretical limits were actually practical boundaries waiting to be exceeded. That proof would follow her for the rest of her career. Her radio crackled with a message from command. "Ghost 7, report to General Morrison's office for immediate debrief." The administrative phase was beginning. Over the next several hours, she'd reconstruct every detail of the mission for analysts who would try to understand how human capability had exceeded their mathematical models. They'd want ballistic data, environmental readings, psychological assessments, and equipment specifications. What they'd discover was that exceptional performance emerged from the intersection of preparation, opportunity, and something indefinable that couldn't be captured in reports or replicated through training protocols. The shot had been possible not because of any single factor, but because of the convergence of dozens of elements that had been developing over 15 years of continuous improvement. Walking toward the command center, Reaper reflected on the strange mathematics of military service. One shot, lasting 3.2 seconds, had eliminated a threat that had haunted intelligence agencies for nearly a decade. One moment of perfect execution had validated years of training, justified enormous investments in equipment and personnel, and demonstrated the continued relevance of human capability in an increasingly technological battlefield. But beyond the strategic implications, beyond the tactical success, beyond the personal achievement, there was something simpler and more profound. 43 humanitarian workers could finally rest in peace, knowing their deaths had been answered with absolute precision across an impossible distance. Justice had traveled at 2,800 feet per second and arrived with mathematical certainty. The debrief with General Morrison lasted 3 hours and covered every conceivable aspect of the mission. Morrison was a soldier's general, someone who'd earned his stars through field performance rather than political navigation. He understood exceptional operators because he'd been one himself during his younger years in Delta Force. "Walk me through the shot sequence," he said, settling back in his chair as if preparing for a technical lecture. Reaper reconstructed the entire process: target acquisition, range estimation, environmental assessment, ballistic calculations, trigger control, follow-through. She described it with the clinical precision of someone who understood that extraordinary performances required extraordinary analysis. Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When she finished, he was quiet for several moments, processing what he'd heard. "The computers said it was impossible," he finally said. "Ballistics software, atmospheric modeling, trajectory analysis, everything suggested that shot was beyond human capability. Computers don't account for intuition, sir. They can't calculate the feel of wind patterns or the sense of atmospheric pressure changes. They deal in probabilities, not possibilities." Morrison nodded. "Fair point. But what you accomplished today, it's going to generate attention at levels you might not be prepared for. Pentagon's already asking questions. JSOC wants a full technical analysis. Special Operations Command is talking about new training protocols based on your techniques." Reaper had expected this. Exceptional military performances inevitably became institutional property, studied and dissected until the human element was reduced to procedural documentation. The shot would be analyzed, the techniques would be codified, and other snipers would attempt to replicate what had happened in the Afghan mountains. Most of them would fail, not because they lacked skill, but because they lacked the specific combination of experience, intuition, and environmental awareness that had made the shot possible. "Permission to speak freely, sir." Morrison gestured for her to continue. "The shot worked because everything aligned perfectly: equipment, conditions, target behavior, preparation. That alignment isn't something that can be manufactured or scheduled. It's something that emerges from the intersection of preparation and opportunity." "You're saying it can't be replicated." "I'm saying it can't be guaranteed. Other operators might achieve similar results under different circumstances, but trying to recreate this exact scenario would be like trying to capture lightning." Morrison made another note. "The Pentagon's going to want guarantees anyway. They always do." The conversation continued for another hour, covering operational security, media management, and the inevitable requests for training demonstrations that would follow. Morrison was trying to protect her from the institutional pressure that accompanied legendary performances, but they both understood that certain kinds of success created obligations that transcended personal preference. Finally, Morrison closed his notebook and leaned forward. "Off the record, Captain, that was the finest piece of marksmanship I've witnessed in 32 years of military service. Your grandfather would be proud." The comment caught Reaper off guard. Morrison had done his homework, researching her family history and understanding the lineage that had produced her capabilities. Her grandfather's influence extended far beyond shooting technique. He'd instilled the mental discipline and philosophical approach that made exceptional performance possible. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet. The hard part starts now. Success at your level creates expectations and responsibilities that can be harder to handle than the original achievement." As she left Morrison's office, Reaper understood exactly what he meant. The shot had taken 3.2 seconds to complete, but its consequences would extend for years. She'd proven that certain theoretical limits were actually practical boundaries, and that proof would follow her throughout her career. Walking across the base in the fatting afternoon light, she noticed the subtle changes in how other soldiers looked at her. Word had spread through unofficial channels, as it always did in military communities. The respect was genuine but also isolating. Exceptional performance created a kind of separation that was difficult to bridge. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her sister back in Minnesota. "Heard through family channels that you had a good day at work. Grandpa's rifle would be jealous." The message made her smile. Her family understood the significance of what had happened without needing technical details or operational briefings. They knew she'd achieved something exceptional, and that was enough. That evening, alone in her quarters, Reaper cleaned her personal sidearm with the same methodical attention she'd given the Barrett earlier. The routine was meditative, a way of processing the day's events through familiar ritual. As she worked, she reflected on the strange trajectory that had led from a childhood in northern Minnesota to a mountain ridge in Afghanistan, from target shooting with her grandfather to eliminating one of the world's most wanted terrorists. The path hadn't been linear or predictable. It had emerged from the intersection of natural talent, obsessive training, and circumstances that demanded the absolute best from human capability. The shot had been possible not because of any single factor, but because of the convergence of everything she'd learned over 15 years of continuous improvement. Outside her window, she could see the Afghan night sky, vast and clear and filled with stars that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. Somewhere in those mountains, other threats were planning other atrocities. The war would continue, presenting new challenges and demanding new solutions. But today had been different. Today, justice had traveled at 2,800 feet per second across more than 2 miles of thin mountain air, arriving with absolute precision and mathematical certainty. Today, 43 humanitarian workers could finally rest in peace. The rifle cleaning was complete, but Reaper continued the ritual anyway, finding comfort in the familiar motions. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that human capability could exceed technological limitations. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She'd made the shot that mattered, across a distance that shouldn't have been possible, under conditions that challenged the limits of human precision. The mathematics had been perfect, the execution flawless, the result absolute. In the morning, the legend would begin growing, spreading through military communities like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. The story would be told and retold, analyzed and mythologized, until the reality became secondary to the narrative. But tonight, it was still just the truth. One shot, 3.2 seconds, 2,400 meters. Justice delivered with perfect precision by a woman who'd spent her entire life preparing for that exact moment. The mountains held their silence, and the stars bore witness to mathematics made manifest through human will and exceptional skill. 3 months later, the ripple effects of what military historians would eventually call the Nazari shot were still spreading through global intelligence communities. The elimination of Khalil Nazari had disrupted terror networks across 3 continents, as his death created power vacuums that other extremist leaders struggled to fill. But more significantly, the manner of his elimination, a single shot across an impossible distance, had become something approaching military legend. Captain Zara, Reaper, Volkov found herself in the strange position of being simultaneously one of the most classified and most discussed operators in recent military history. The official details remained locked behind security protocols, but whispered versions of the story had spread through sniper schools, special operations units, and intelligence agencies worldwide. Each retelling added new elements, until the reality became embellished with details that approached the mythological. She was sitting in a nondescript briefing room at Fort Bragg, facing a panel of officers who represented every branch of special operations. The meeting had been classified as eyes only at levels that made even seasoned intelligence professionals uncomfortable. Present were representatives from JSOC, Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, Marine Force Recon, and Air Force Special Operations, the cream of American military capability, assembled to understand how one woman had exceeded every theoretical limit they'd previously accepted. Colonel Sarah Chen from JSOC leaned forward, her expression mixing professional curiosity with barely concealed amazement. Captain Volkov, We've run the ballistics through every computer model available to the Department of Defense. According to our most advanced systems, the shot you made should have been impossible given the environmental conditions and target movement. Reaper maintained her composure, though internally she was growing tired of explaining intuition to people who thought warfare could be reduced to algorithms. Ma'am, with respect, your computer models don't account for variables that can't be quantified. Wind patterns at extreme distances, microatmospheric changes, the feel of barrel harmonics during trigger pull, these are elements that require human interpretation. Major Rodriguez from Delta Force consulted his tablet before speaking. We've been analyzing long-range shooting records for the past 50 years. Your shot represents not just a new distance record, but a quantum leap beyond what we thought was humanly achievable. The previous confirmed kill record was 1,367 meters. You exceeded that by over a mile. The numbers were accurate, but they missed the point entirely. Exceptional marksmanship wasn't about breaking records. It was about delivering precision when lives hung in the balance. The shot had worked because it needed to work, because 43 innocent people deserved justice, because sometimes the impossible became possible when moral necessity aligned with perfect preparation. Admiral Thompson from Naval Special Warfare cleared his throat. Captain, we're not questioning your achievement. What we're trying to understand is whether your techniques can be systematized, taught to other operators, incorporated into our training protocols. This was the heart of institutional thinking, the belief that exceptional performance could be reverse-engineered, codified, and mass-produced through improved procedures. Reaper had seen this pattern before with other breakthrough achievements. The military would study her methods, create training programs, and then wonder why other operators couldn't replicate results that had emerged from 15 years of obsessive personal development. Sir, I can teach the fundamentals, breathing techniques, trigger control, ballistic calculations, environmental assessment, but the integration of those elements into intuitive shooting, that's something that develops over years of practice under increasingly difficult conditions. It's not a skill that can be downloaded through classroom instruction. General Morrison, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, finally spoke. What Captain Volkov is trying to tell you, gentlemen, is that she didn't just make a lucky shot. She made an impossible shot because she's been preparing for impossible shots her entire career. The question isn't whether we can replicate her specific techniques. It's whether we can identify and develop other operators who have similar potential. The room fell silent as the implications settled. They weren't dealing with a replicable procedure or a technological breakthrough. They were dealing with human capability that existed at the intersection of natural talent, obsessive training, and circumstances that demanded absolute excellence. Such capability couldn't be manufactured. It could only be recognized and properly supported. Colonel Chen consulted her notes again. Captain, intelligence reports suggest that Nazari's death has had strategic impacts far beyond eliminating a single high-value target. 3 separate terror networks have gone dark since the shooting, apparently concerned that their leadership isn't as protected as they believed. How do you assess the psychological impact of unconventional elimination methods? It was a delicately phrased question that got to the heart of asymmetric warfare, the power of demonstrating capabilities that exceeded enemy expectations. Terrorist leaders operated under the assumption that distance and terrain provided absolute security. The Nazari shot had shattered that assumption in the most definitive way possible. Ma'am, terror networks depend on their leaders feeling invulnerable. When those leaders realize they can be reached across distances they thought were safe, it changes their behavior patterns. They become more cautious, more paranoid, less effective at operational planning. Fear works both ways in asymmetric conflict. Admiral Thompson leaned back in his chair, processing the strategic implications. So you're suggesting that exceptional marksmanship capabilities serve as psychological warfare tools, not just tactical elimination methods. I'm suggesting that when enemies discover their assumptions about safety are wrong, they make mistakes. Mistakes create opportunities for conventional operations that would have been impossible when those leaders felt secure. The briefing continued for another hour, covering everything from equipment specifications to training methodologies to strategic psychological impacts. But Reaper could see that the panel was gradually reaching the same conclusion Morrison had articulated. Exceptional performance emerged from the intersection of factors that couldn't be systematically replicated. They could study her techniques, improve their training programs, and identify operators with similar potential. But they couldn't manufacture another operator capable of making shots that exceeded theoretical limitations. Such capability developed through years of evolution that couldn't be accelerated or shortcut through institutional programming. As the meeting concluded, Colonel Chen approached Reaper privately. "Captain, I want you to know that your achievement has implications beyond military applications. You've demonstrated that human capability can exceed our most sophisticated technological models. That has significance for how we think about human potential in general." It was an observation that Reaper had been considering herself. The shot hadn't just eliminated a terrorist. It had proven that certain theoretical limits were actually practical boundaries, waiting to be exceeded by individuals willing to push beyond conventional expectations. That proof had implications that extended far beyond military sniper training. Walking across Fort Bragg after the briefing, Reaper noticed the familiar pattern of respectful distance that exceptional performance created. Other soldiers acknowledged her with nods and brief greetings, but few approached for casual conversation. Success, at extreme levels, created a kind of isolation that was difficult to bridge, even among military professionals who understood exceptional capability. Her phone buzzed with a message from Martinez. "Heard you're getting the full Pentagon treatment. Hope they're not trying to turn you into a training manual." She smiled at his assessment. Martinez understood that exceptional marksmanship was more art than science, more intuition than procedure. The institutional desire to systematize her achievements was understandable but ultimately futile. You couldn't create standard operating procedures for capabilities that existed beyond standard parameters. That evening, alone in her quarters at Fort Bragg, Reaper reflected on the strange trajectory her career had taken since the Afghan mountains. The shot had lasted 3.2 seconds, but its consequences were still unfolding months later. She'd become a case study, a legend, and a proof of concept all simultaneously. The attention was professionally valuable but personally isolating. Her sister had sent another message. "Mom wants to know if you're famous now. I told her you're the same person who used to practice shooting by hitting quarters at 100 yards." The message reminded her of something important. Exceptional performance was built on foundations of ordinary excellence. The 2,400-meter shot had been possible because she'd spent years perfecting shots at 100 meters, then 200, then 500, gradually expanding her capabilities until theoretical limits became practical boundaries to exceed. Fame was irrelevant. Recognition was secondary. What mattered was maintaining the standards of precision and preparation that made impossible shots possible when circumstances demanded them. The mountains of Afghanistan had tested those standards and found them sufficient. Future challenges would require similar excellence under different conditions. Outside her window, the lights of Fort Bragg stretched toward the horizon, illuminating a community of soldiers who dedicated their lives to capabilities that most civilians couldn't comprehend. Somewhere among them were operators who possessed the potential for their own impossible achievements, waiting for circumstances that would demand the absolute best from human capability. The legend of the Nazari shot would continue growing, spreading through military communities and inspiring new generations of marksmen to push beyond conventional limitations. But legends were just stories about real moments when preparation met opportunity and human capability exceeded theoretical boundaries. Tonight, that was enough. The mathematics had been perfect, the execution flawless, the result absolute. Justice had traveled at 2,800 feet per second across an impossible distance, and the world was safer for that precision. In the morning, there would be new missions, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that human excellence could transcend technological limitations. But tonight, Reaper allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction with work performed to the highest possible standard. The stars above Fort Bragg bore witness to capabilities that existed beyond the reach of computer models and institutional procedures, capabilities that emerged from the intersection of natural talent, obsessive preparation, and moral necessity. They had witnessed the convergence of physics and justice across 2,400 meters of mountain air, and they held that witness with eternal silence. The impossible had become possible through human will made manifest in copper and lead, traveling at velocities that challenged the curvature of the Earth itself. That possibility would echo through military history long after the details became legend, inspiring future operators to push beyond the boundaries of what others believed achievable. The shot had been perfect, the legend was just beginning. 1 year after the Afghan mountains had witnessed the convergence of physics and justice, Captain Zara, Reaper, Volkov found herself in an unexpected position, training the next generation of military snipers at the newly established Long Range Precision Institute. The facility, built specifically to develop extreme-distance marksmanship capabilities, represented the military's institutional response to her unprecedented achievement. But standing on the 1,000-meter range at Fort Carson, watching a class of exceptional marksmen struggle with shots that should have been routine for their skill level, Reaper was reminded once again that extraordinary performance couldn't be manufactured through improved facilities or enhanced curricula. Excellence emerged from the intersection of natural ability, obsessive preparation, and something indefinable that separated the exceptional from the impossible. "Ma'am, the wind's gusting to 20 knots," called Staff Sergeant Martinez, not the Martinez from Afghanistan, but a younger operator named David Martinez who'd earned his place in the program through consistently exceptional performance at conventional distances. "Should we adjust the training parameters?" Reaper studied the wind flags strung along the range, watching the patterns that revealed atmospheric behavior invisible to less experienced eyes. 20-knot winds weren't impossible conditions. They were simply conditions that demanded higher levels of precision and environmental awareness. "Negative, Sergeant. 20 knots is manageable if you understand how wind behaves at distance. Watch the flags at 400, 600, and 800 meters. Notice how the wind speed changes as it moves through different terrain features." The students, all of them proven marksmen selected from elite units across the military, peered downrange with the intensity of scholars studying ancient texts. They could see the flags moving, could calculate approximate wind speeds, could make ballistic adjustments that would be accurate under normal circumstances. But they were still thinking in terms of mechanical precision rather than environmental intuition. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, a Marine sniper who'd earned her place through exceptional performance in Iraq, raised her hand. "Ma'am, how do you account for wind variations that occur during bullet flight time? At extreme distances, conditions can change significantly during the 3 to 4 seconds the projectile is in the air." It was an intelligent question that got to the heart of extreme-distance marksmanship. At ranges beyond 1,500 meters, environmental conditions could shift multiple times during bullet flight, making static calculations insufficient for consistent accuracy. Success required the ability to read atmospheric patterns and predict changes that hadn't yet occurred. "Lieutenant Kim, you're thinking about wind as a series of separate conditions that need individual calculations. At extreme distances, You need to think about wind as a fluid system with predictable patterns. Watch. Reaper settled into the prone position behind her Barrett M82A1, the same rifle that had delivered justice across 2,400 meters of Afghan mountain air. The weapon had become something approaching legendary status within military circles, though she thought of it simply as a precision instrument that responded predictably to proper technique. Through the scope, she observed the target at 1,200 meters, a challenging distance for most marksmen, but well within her normal operating parameters. More importantly, she watched the wind patterns across the entire distance, reading the atmospheric behavior like a meteorologist studying weather systems. Wind at the firing position is 18 knots from the northwest, she called to her students. At 400 meters, it's dropping to about 12 knots and shifting slightly more westerly. At 800 meters, it's picking up again to 15 knots but maintaining the westerly component. At the target, thermal effects from the backstop are creating updrafts that will affect vertical hold. She made microscopic adjustments to her point of aim, compensating not just for current conditions, but for the atmospheric changes the bullet would encounter during its flight. This was the art that separated exceptional marksmen from mechanical precision, the ability to shoot not at where conditions were, but where they would be when the bullet arrived. The shot broke clean, and downrange, the target indicator showed a perfect center hit. The students observed the results with the kind of professional appreciation that came from understanding exactly how difficult such precision was to achieve consistently. "Ma'am," called Sergeant First Class Williams, an Army sniper with 12 years of experience, "how do you develop that level of environmental reading ability? Is it something that can be taught systematically?" Reaper secured the Barrett and stood, considering how to explain capabilities that had developed through 15 years of gradual evolution. The question got to the heart of institutional training philosophy, the belief that exceptional performance could be broken down into component skills that could be taught through structured curricula. Sergeant Williams, environmental reading is partly technique and partly intuition. The technique part, understanding ballistics, reading wind indicators, calculating atmospheric effects, that can be taught through classroom instruction and structured practice. The intuition part develops through experience with thousands of shots under varying conditions. She gestured toward the range, where wind flags continued their constant dance with atmospheric currents. You develop environmental intuition by shooting in conditions that challenge your current capabilities, then gradually expanding those parameters until difficult conditions become normal operating standards. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, the Institute's commanding officer, approached from the observation tower. Harrison was a career infantry officer who'd requested assignment to the program specifically because he wanted to understand how exceptional marksmanship capabilities could be systematically developed and deployed. "Captain Volkov, I've been watching your instruction methods. You seem to focus more on environmental awareness and mental preparation than on technical shooting fundamentals. Is that intentional?" It was an astute observation. Traditional marksmanship training emphasized mechanical precision, breath control, trigger technique, sight alignment, follow-through. Those fundamentals were essential, but they were also baseline requirements rather than distinguishing capabilities. Excellence beyond conventional parameters required different kinds of preparation. "Sir, most operators selected for this program already have solid shooting fundamentals. What they need to develop is the ability to apply those fundamentals under conditions that exceed normal training parameters. That requires environmental awareness, mental discipline, and confidence in their capabilities that goes beyond mechanical execution." Harrison nodded slowly. "Are you suggesting that extreme-distance marksmanship is more psychological than technical?" "I'm suggesting that at extreme distances, technical precision is necessary but not sufficient. Success requires the integration of technical skills with environmental awareness, mental discipline, and intuitive understanding of atmospheric behavior. That integration can't be achieved through classroom instruction alone. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent message from the Base Communications Center. Long Range Institute, this is Fort Carson Command. We have a priority tasking for Captain Volkov. Immediate response required. Reaper felt the familiar shift in atmospheric pressure that preceded operational deployment. Priority taskings didn't come through routine administrative channels. They came when circumstances demanded capabilities that existed beyond normal parameters. The relaxed training environment instantly transformed into pre-mission tension. Students continue range practice with Sergeant Martinez supervising. Focus on environmental reading exercises at 800 to 1,000 meters. I'll review your progress when I return. Walking toward the command center, Reaper reflected on the strange trajectory her career had taken since Afghanistan. The Nazari shot had made her, simultaneously, one of the most classified and most discussed operators in military history. She'd become proof that human capability could exceed technological limitations, but that proof came with obligations and expectations that extended far beyond personal achievement. The command center briefing room contained the now familiar assemblage of senior officers and intelligence officials that accompanied high-priority missions. General Morrison was present via secure video link, his expression carrying the kind of gravity that suggested exceptional circumstances. Captain Volkov, Morrison began without preamble, we have a situation that requires your specific capabilities. Intelligence has located Dmitry Volkov, no relation, despite the surname, who's been coordinating arms shipments to terrorist organizations across Eastern Europe. He's currently moving through the Carpathian Mountains under heavy security. The briefing continued with tactical details that painted a familiar picture. High-value target, challenging terrain, limited window of opportunity, conventional forces insufficient for the mission parameters. But there was something different about this briefing, a subtle tension that suggested complications beyond normal operational challenges. "Sir," Reaper said carefully, "what makes this target require specialized long-range capabilities? The Carpathians offer numerous opportunities for conventional special operations approaches." Morrison's expression darkened slightly. Volkov isn't just coordinating arms shipments. He's personally involved in developing new weapons technologies for terrorist applications. Specifically, he's been working on portable surface-to-air missiles that could threaten civilian aviation across multiple countries. Intelligence suggests he's planning to deliver prototypes within the next 48 hours. The implications crystallized instantly. Surface-to-air missiles in terrorist hands represented a threat that transcended regional security concerns. Commercial aviation would become vulnerable to attacks that could kill hundreds of people and cripple international transportation systems. The target wasn't just another arms dealer. He was a threat to global civilian security. "Target location and security posture," she asked, already transitioning mentally from training instructor to operational sniper. Moving through the Carpathian Ridge system at coordinates that place him approximately 2,800 meters from the nearest feasible shooting position. Weather conditions are deteriorating, with snow and wind patterns that exceed recommended parameters for conventional long-range engagement. 2,800 meters. In deteriorating weather, against a target who knew he was being hunted and would be moving with maximum security precautions. The mission parameters exceeded even the Afghan shot in terms of technical difficulty, environmental challenges, and strategic importance. But as Reaper listened to the tactical briefing, she felt the familiar calm settling over her mind. The space where doubt died and physics became poetry, where impossible circumstances transformed into mathematical problems waiting for precise solutions. "Sir," she said quietly, I'll need my Barrett, custom loads, and transport to the insertion point within 6 hours. The weather window won't last longer than that. Morrison nodded grimly. Aircraft is already being prepped. Captain, I want you to understand, this shot is even more difficult than Afghanistan. Range, weather, target security, time pressure, everything is working against conventional success probability. Reaper stood, already mentally calculating atmospheric variables and ballistic requirements. General, with respect, I stopped thinking in terms of probability 3 years ago in the Afghan mountains. Some shots matter too much to worry about the odds. As she left the briefing room, Reaper felt the familiar transformation beginning. The shift from human being to precision instrument, from individual operator to agent of mathematical consequence. The training institute faded into background noise as her mind engaged with environmental variables, equipment specifications, and the physics of delivering justice across distances that challenged human capability. The Carpathian Mountains were waiting, holding secrets that threatened civilian lives across multiple continents. In those mountains, a man named Dmitry Volkov was moving surface-to-air missiles toward deployment positions, unaware that mathematics was calculating his termination across nearly 3 kilometers of winter air. The shot had already begun in Reaper's mind, where wind speed and bullet trajectory were dancing their eternal mathematics, where success and failure balanced on the edge of a single exhale, where human capability prepared to exceed theoretical limitations one more time. In 6 hours, the impossible would become possible again, or the world would face consequences that could be measured in hundreds of civilian casualties. The mathematics were unforgiving, but so was the woman who'd spent her entire life preparing for moments when precision mattered more than probability. The mountains ahead looked like sleeping giants, their peaks lost in storm clouds that were growing thicker by the hour. But somewhere in those mountains, justice waited to travel at 2,800 feet per second across an impossible distance, carried by human will made manifest in copper and lead. The legend was about to add another chapter.